Ravenwood, West Virginia, was a quiet town tucked in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains. Surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, it was the kind of place people visited for its eerie charm. It wasn't the kind of town you'd find on postcards, but it was the kind of place that lingered in your memory, partly because of its old-fashioned appearance and partly because of the dark rumors that swirled around it like the fog in the valleys. In the heart of the town, there was an old inn called the Raven's Nest. It was a place for travelers passing through, those who had business in the small town or just needed a rest from the road. But the townsfolk knew better than to stay out after dusk. Ravenwood had a secret, one that kept the streets empty after nightfall. The legend of the Hollow Man had been passed down from generation to generation. People said that long ago, a man named Daniel Rowe had lived in a secluded cabin near the edge of the woods. He was a scientist of sorts, obsessed with theories no one understood. Some said he was trying to unlock the secrets of immortality. Others whispered that he dabbled in dark arts, conducting experiments too dangerous to speak of. But one bitter winter night, Daniel Rowe simply disappeared. Not a trace of him was ever found, but the people of Ravenwood knew better than to forget him. They say that if you wandered too far into the woods after dark, you might hear him. The Hollow Man, a faceless figure lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim anyone foolish enough to enter his domain. Elena Walters was not the type to believe in ghost stories. As a reporter from Washington, D.C., she had traveled the country chasing down bizarre tales and writing exposés on strange phenomena. But when her editor had assigned her to cover local legends in small towns across the U.S., Ravenwood had caught her attention. There was something about the history of this place, something that felt off. She checked into the Raven's Nest on a chilly evening in late October. The inn was old, its wooden floors creaking with every step, and the smell of pine and earth filled the air. Mrs. Green, the elderly innkeeper, greeted Elena with a smile that was just a bit too forced. "You'll be staying for just one night, dear?" she asked, her voice low and raspy. Elena nodded, offering a polite smile. "Just one night. I'm here to explore the local folklore. I've heard a lot about the Hollow Man." At this, Mrs. Green's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a shadow crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "People say a lot of things around here. Some of them are best left unsaid. Just be careful." Elena chuckled, brushing off the warning. She had heard far worse superstitions during her career. She thanked Mrs. Green and headed to her room. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The room felt stifling, the air heavy with an oppressive silence that clung to her skin. Her mind buzzed with thoughts of the Hollow Man, though she wasn't sure if it was the legend itself or the creepy atmosphere of Ravenwood that kept her awake. Around midnight, Elena heard something, a soft tapping at her door. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, more insistent, like a deliberate knock. She stood frozen, listening, her heart beginning to race. There was no one out there. She hadn't heard footsteps or the sound of anyone walking down the hall. She opened the door to find nothing. Her pulse quickened as she looked down the hallway. The darkness seemed to stretch unnaturally, as though the shadows were swallowing the light. But it wasn't just the darkness that made her uneasy. On the wooden floor, faint scratches were visible, deep gouges as if something had been dragged across it, something heavy. Curious, Elena followed the marks down the hallway, her footsteps creaking with every step. The scratches led to the stairwell, and as she descended, the air grew colder. Her breath fogged in front of her face. The basement of the inn was cold and damp, filled with crates of old furniture and forgotten relics of the past. And that's when she saw it. A figure in the far corner of the basement. It was tall, thin, and eerily still. It stood just out of the reach of the dim light, its shape barely distinguishable. The air around it felt charged, thick with an unspoken presence. For a moment, Elena thought it was a trick of her mind, a result of too little sleep. But then the figure turned its head slightly, and she saw its eyes. Black as coal, empty voids. No pupils, no irises. Just darkness. Frozen in place, Elena watched as the figure slowly began to move toward her, each step sending an icy chill down her spine. The air grew heavier, suffocating, as though the very basement was closing in on her. It was then that she felt it, the overwhelming sensation that she wasn't alone, that something had been watching her long before she had even stepped foot in this town.